Hi! What are you doing in my storage unit? You want me to tell you a story? I would absolutely love to tell you a story. This is actually a really fabulous location to tell a story because there's so many memories here in my storage unit. So, yeah, I could tell you a story. Well, come on in and sit down. Are you good? All right, kiddos. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, I was a little girl. And yes, it was a long time ago. And I had grandparents when I was a little girl on both sides. And perhaps I will tell you about them. Yeah, that's the story I will tell you today. In fact, this beautiful, I don't know if you can see it, but this beautiful, whoa, there's some more memories right there, huh? Maybe I'll tell that story later. Look right here. See this quilt? This is a handmade quilt from my grandma on my dad's side. Now, my grandma on my dad's side had 13 children, and each one of those children, most of them had lots of kids themselves, and so on and so forth. So my grandma on my dad's side would have huge family reunions. Now, I never knew my grandpa because he died before I was born, but my grandma loved to quilt. So her whole house was full of quilting squares. You'd walk down the hallways, and on the left and on the right there'd be these patchwork squares. So some of these, like, there would be only the pink here piled up, or she would have it started where she'd have this whole square right here already started, maybe piled up. Well, she put together quilts for every single one of her family members, and this is the one she gave me. And as you see, it's really ratted and pretty old because I've had it for most of my life. It's a beautiful quilt. So my grandma on that side of the family, she reminded me of an Indian. She would garden. She would stand up and then lean fully over and then weed and do all her gardening things that way. And I totally remember that. I also remember in her garden there in Oregon, my dad, when he was little, had built her a fruit house. It was called a fruit house, kind of like an above ground cellar, and it was, I think it was painted teal and maybe pink. I think it was something like that. It was made out of logs, and these logs were painted. It was so funny. But she would have all kinds of canned goods and jars of applesauce and pears and all kinds of stuff in there that would keep all winter long. And I remember that very distinctly. I know my dad built her house when he was like 16, 17, 18, something like that. I just have very fond memories of that that clan. It was like a tribe. There's so many of them. When we get together, it'd be huge family reunions on that side of the family. I was told that my grandma came over on a wagon train and that she would hitch the horses and take care of all the horses when they came over from the Dakotas, but I have recently found out that it may not be a true story, but nevertheless, I love that story. I think it's cool, kind of the wild spirit of my grandma. But in contrast, on my mom's side, she was an only child. So here my dad's one of 13 and my mom's the only child. They were immigrants from Europe, and my grandma, my mom's mom, she was so sweet. I loved her. She was kind of jolly, and my grandma on the one I just told you about, who liked to weed in the garden, and my dad's mom, she was kind of big, and she would wear muumuus, and she kind of looked like really tanned and kind of wrinkled and all that. But on my mom's side, my mom's mom was, kind of somewhat the opposite. She was still a little full, but she was fair-skinned, and she had little curly white hair, but she wore a neck brace because she had broken her neck earlier in her life. She was so sanguine. She would always be sitting on the phone. They had a little tiny house, little white house, and I'll never forget her sitting in her kitchen talking on the phone. In the 60s and the 70s, you can imagine the kind of kitchen that looked like. And she'd chat, lots of gossiping, which she loved to do. But I remember her telling my sister and I, when my mom wasn't looking, that there were you know, sugared cereal in the cupboard over there, and we could go get that and snack on that. It wasn't a yard per se, it was kind of like a field next to their house, theirs, and they had some trees, fruit trees and whatnot, and my sister and I would climb these trees and sit in there, and I remember Grandma bringing out goodies for us to eat, like grilled cheese sandwiches and things like that, things that we didn't get at home very often, especially with Velveeta cheese. Oh yes. One of the other cool things about my grandma's, I remember in their home, it was super small, but they had TV trays. So when it was dinner time or any meal time, it was like whip out the dinner trays and sit in front of the TV and watch whatever Grandpa wanted to watch. How many of you have TV trays at home? Yeah, I don't have TV trays at home, but my grandma's mom, so my great grandma on my mom's side, so my mom's mom, she was super old, but she was one of 11 children, and when she was 18 years old, her parents sent her on a ship. This is a story that I am told. Her parents put her on a ship with all of her siblings at 18 years old and said, okay, bon voyage, we'll see you when we get there. So my great grandma took all her siblings over to America to immigrate on her own, and then the parents came later. But one thing about my great grandma I'll never forget was she's very proper, extremely proper. And so we would, when we go over to her house to visit, we would go into her kitchen, and there in the kitchen, she would serve us cayenne pepper soup. Cayenne pepper is so hot, but she made soup out of it. And I tell you, I think that's the reason why she lived so long, is because she lived over 100 years old. I think she was 104 when she died. One of the things she loved to do also is serve cream cheese blocks with that. So when we'd go sit down at her table, you'd have cayenne pepper soup, and then you would have this tray of cream cheese cut into blocks. So you had little squares of cream cheese, and you would eat that cream cheese while you ate this super hot soup. Sometimes the memories are better later in your life than when you were little, because sometimes you're like, really, Grandma? Really? Do I have to eat that? But now it's a very nice memory. But I'll never forget, my great grandma she was Irish and English, very, 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 very English and very Irish. You know, you had your tea and you had your spirit, your Irish spirit to go alongside of it. She always would wear her hair up. So she always had her hair up in a bun. She always had it up, so you never saw it down, but it was just pure white hair. And she had this huge comb, and she would comb it this way. Sometimes she had like hats. So like I actually have a hat here in storage from my great grandma. It's not this one, but it's like something like this, and it's like from the 20s. It's like sits to the side and has a hat pin in it. And but she always wore her hair up, and I always wanted to know what it looked like down. So one morning we were on her front porch, and in Portland you would have a lot of times you'd have older houses would have porches that were enclosed because the weather is kind of bad much of the year, and then it was glass, and then you have a porch swing, and I love that porch swing because it bounced. It was like you could sit on it and just bounce. It was beautiful. I'd love to be out there with my sister. But she came out there one day, and she sat down and she let us take her hair out and brush it. I'd never seen her before with long hair. It had always been up, and then all of a sudden it was super long and pure white. What's my point of this story? It's just to tell you kind of a little bit about where I come from. Two definitely very, very, very different families, and in classes and in society and all this stuff kind of clashing on some level, but I come from a very unique family. I'm sure that you do as well. Though we all come from very different families of origin, we are being called back to our original family, which is to be part of the family of Elohim and the family of Israel. So no matter where you come from, you are invited to come into the family and be part of Yah's family. How cool is that, right? So no matter how good or bad or wonderful or tragic your family's history is, your family of origins history is, or where that stands right now, you have a family. Isn't that cool? Yeah, he's asking us to come back home. I end all my stories with and she lived happily ever after. And yes, I will live happily ever after. I have chosen the narrow path to live happily ever after. So that ends my story today. So thank you for coming by to my very dirty storage unit. In fact, right before you showed up, I made that light fall and broke some of my bulbs. Definitely come again, okay? Bye-bye.